morning. I wish to discuss with you today what it is like for an artist like my own good self to be subjected by the community around us. The abject questioning that the community imposes on us, imposes on our sociability, in fact, is in itself a varied proposition. It is itself an epitome of what the true asphyxia of ourselves as a community in our modern socio-political order that we have constructed for us has forged in us. It is ironic in itself. It is an irony beyond compare that the very society that would laud us or perhaps commend us or condemn us for our art, for our intelligence, perhaps for our craft, for our very introjection, for our very outlook towards the Lebenswelt itself, to the world around us itself, the world that so very freely takes its turns assessing us, sizing us up. Well, there are instances in a creative person's life when those around us, lay people, so to speak, question quite abjectly our choices in life. And while they are respectful, while they often are not, to be fair to them, are respectful of our discretion, oftener than not, they tend to insult our acumen and our very introjection itself that ironically they so very gladly comment. My apologies. They do condemn it sometimes, but that is beside the point. In any case, there are certain aspects of a creative person's life that are undeniably the primal movements of our creative pursuits. Our choice of tools, the choice we make as regards our workplace, the choice we make as regards what town, perhaps our hometowns, perhaps a lonely shack, a lonely shotgun shack in the country, perhaps a tree house in a deep woods. The very primal movements, the very primary movers, so to say, of our creative pursuits, the non-creators, the lay people, you and I, subject on a continual basis, quite painfully so, let me assure you. If you happen to be non-creative sort, let me assure you it is quite painful to be subjected to. It is quite painful to have your discretion, to have your interjection put into scrutiny. One such primal movement is our choice of the place where we choose to work in. They say William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson flocked to London for the sake of their careers and excuse me, I've just had my lunch. In any case, they say William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson flocked to London unless Ben Jonson was a native of London itself, as I don't seem to recall. My memory is usually drowsy in the noontime hours. Excuse me for that. Anyway, I happen to be a fairly sociable writer. I'm fortunate enough to have grown up around people who are pleasantly sociable. They are a pleasure to be with. But it does happen quite often to me that they question my choices. It strikes me rather odd because it strikes me rather odd in the light of the fact that they value my opinion, they value my interjection, they have great regard, immense regard for what I, as a creative artist among them, have to convey to them, for their sake. Yet they seem to question my personal choices in life. I understand why people assure me that palatability is the only way for me to gain an audience, which is quite understandable in a way, despite the fact that they do not understand palatability at all. Palatability to them implies an altogether different vice. I live and work in my hometown. And while people do question, and well, I too let them question what evidently is a matter of my natural inclination, it pains me to think that they would question my choice to have stayed in my hometown. Writing entails as a parera, as an ornament not innate to the work or to the creative, to the very act of the creative pursuit itself, which, if we regard as an art form in itself, might be justified in I might be justified in using the tenor parega for it. The choice of where one prefers to stay in and where one prefers to write in should be a matter of personal and professional preference alone, and not of the subjective reconstruction and the needless subjective reconstruction that people often subject us to. You may choose to live in London or in Montreal, or you may choose to live somewhere in Alaska, somewhere among the Danes, or in a small tribal town in central India if you wish. It may or may not have a negative or a positive impact, for that matter, on your artistic choices and on your choices as an entrepreneur. In the age of internet, it is a belief I hold and I uphold quite firmly that one does not need to stay in the thick, as I say, in the thick of the puddle that is our modern civilization and all that the modern civilization entails of an artist, just primarily a fatist nonsense. I don't subscribe to the fact, to the popularly held belief that one must, if one cares a whit about their professional careers, be prepared to settle themselves into the very thick of some metropolis. It really does not matter. F. Scott Fitzgerald could not write well enough, could not write, could not write enough to satiate his knack for competing with the likes of Hemingway. Hemingway, on the other hand, could write anywhere he liked. Trollope used to write on the docks of ships and on the decks of ships too, if the need would arise, and it did arise quite a few times in his life. I am a fairly stable person, and the allure that the continent of Europe used to hold for the second generation romantics and for the likes of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, Ford Madox Ford, all the expatriates of the Jazz Age. I don't subscribe to their manner of living, much as I admire them for their craft, for their aesthetics, and for their manner of living itself. It grew evident to me once I turned 22 that theirs is not a life I wish to lead myself. I wish for a stable life. I wish for stability. And I wish for having my hometown, having my place of work, my place of worship as an art, a place of worship for my creative demeanor, and not merely, not solely, not in the least on a basis of whether or not I am hopeful of ever gaining a local audience around where I live and work in. It really makes little sense to me to subscribe to conventionalities. Yes, it is a paradox in itself that I subscribe to a lot of conventionalities. This has to do more with my upbringing than it is to do with my creative demeanor, which is what I primarily regard as being my the primary mover of my creative pursuit of my writing life, that is to say. I live here and I choose to live here because there is a sublimity to the ekphrasis, the vividity that nature itself lays out before us for our palate to draw as a prestige. And I, as an artist, cannot choose to ignore what nature has to offer. My town comprises primarily of townships, industrial townships, where I grew up, one of which I call my birthplace, my place of upbringing. And while it does contain fairly advanced sorts of industrial townships built a couple of decades ago, my hometown boasts of the gifts of nature as nature had intended them for us to relish in. And it is for this very reason that I prefer my hometown or other places that I may or may not find myself living in. I cannot imagine myself, I cannot construe the entire premise, the entire notion of living in a metropolis alone to be able to succeed in some way or the other. If I do need to pitch some literary agent, or if I do need to conduct a virtual book tour, what do people care? If I live in Montreal, if I live in the land of koalas, or if I live at the core of the earth, what would it matter? As long as I can produce good art that does have the lux veritatis ethic to it, the timeless, perhaps not timeless, but a thrive in it, an innate thrive in it that thrives it, and the semiotics of my works of art to anything that approaches immortality of any sort. I believe that if I can manage that in my lifetime, it would not matter, not for me in the slightest, not for me in the slightest, to ever have stayed in my hometown. That is all.